Hey everyone, this episode is with Shama Hyder and it's part of our Revenue Rockstars series. Shama is best known as the CEO of Zen Media, and she's also a keynote speaker, best selling author, and thought leader when it comes to helping some of the most successful brands on the web. She joins my colleague Tara Ben to sit down and discuss how using accolades and third party credibility can help grow your agency. Shama covers what accolades actually matter, how to leverage them to help drive revenue for your agency, and ways to build a community that strengthens your brand. Let's get into it.
When we think of accolades, I think most of us jump to the idea that accolades simply serves as a pat on the back. But as you work with clients, you talk about them actually serving well beyond that. Um, Talk us through what are you doing to position accolades for more than just positive sound bites?
Yeah, great question. We did dive right in there. So, here's the thing. I would say it is a pat on the back, and that's not a bad thing, right? So, I think the connotation often with accolades is that it can seem self-serving, like, okay, it's validation, ego boost, but so what? But here's what we have to realize, right? And I think this is what's kind of changed a ton in the since COVID, but even before COVID, and I think especially for agencies, so much of the buying process now happens where we don't get to see it, where perception matters dramatically, where your brand, because so many agencies are often busy, and this is true for I think so many marketers, we're so busy often working on client brands that we don't always think about our brand or think about how we're positioned in the marketplace. But if you're really honest and with yourself and you're walking the talk and you're telling your clients how much your brand matters, then your brand matters just as much. And so these accolades aren't just so much like a woohoo, high five the internal team, but when used correctly, you realize that clients, your existing clients, your prospective clients, so essentially anybody in your buying funnel, they're the ones that are doing their research. So, when you win an Inc. 5000 award, when you're listed as one of the top companies, when you're to work for, with like all these things that are they're beyond just like trophies on the wall or plaques. There's so much more than that because this starts to define the narrative of who you are as a company, who your leadership is, and let's face it, everybody wants to work with a successful company. It's just the truth, right? Like we all want to be associated. We all want it's funny because Tara, searches when Google first came out, like search engines first came out, just seems forever ago, but weirdly was not forever ago. um, People search for cheapest, right? So a lot of what you saw was cheapest web design, cheapest SEO. Now what we see is this huge shift towards best SEO, best web design, best PR, whatever it is. And so people are hungry for and they're looking for what is the best. And these are all the reasons why you have to take accolades and how you're positioned. So not just awards, but how you're in the media. We often tell our clients to think about themselves as being first responders for the media. When media has a question, whatever it may be, how quickly do they think of you? Are you their go-to for that topic? And how do you position yourself as such? So, anyways, a lot of meat there for your for your question, but hopefully it sets the stage for why accolades matter as much as they do, and especially for agencies, and especially now.
Walk us through, are there any particular accolades that are most interesting to prospective clients? Touch on, you mentioned a little bit about industry awards. Think, it's even referrals. Are there any particular that stand out to you?
So, the way I always think about it is you've gotta think about it in macro, right? The whole it's like if you really think about a brand and what it is, it's a gut feeling, like individual gut feelings. I feel like this company does good work, right? What makes you say that about something? And chances are it's been micro touch points over time that you're like, oh yeah, this company is going places. Well, how do you know that? So it's not one award or one, these are nice moments that companies should definitely leverage, but it's the entire story. In fact, I firmly believe right now the reason we're not even seeing more interest in Web3 and NFTs and crypto in this whole space is not because the technology is not good, but because there's not enough good storytelling around these things. And so, very similarly, when it's your agency, it's not about hey, is this award worth it or that award worth it? The point is to create that entire kind of, um, if you think about that aura around your brand, right? With multiple wins. So you might say, okay, if we're named like best place to work in Atlanta, how much does that really help us? Do our prospective clients care? And the short answer and long answer are both sort of connected. Short answer is yes, they care because don't companies wanna work with agencies where they feel like they have the best talent? Well, what agency has the best talent? Oh, maybe one that's already being recognized as the best place to work. So it's, I always encourage people to think about these things much more holistically than, "Is this worth our time?" Because when we ask those questions, I think sometimes we miss the bigger picture of that bigger narrative, and the qualitative results show up often before the quantitative in that you have clients saying to you, you have prospects saying to you, "Wow, you guys are everywhere these days." And you feel was like, I don't really know how they said that, but that's kind of what you're going for. You want that impact of you are everywhere these days. That's what breeds trust. I mean, at the end of the day, familiarity builds trust. That's why any agency that's been around for 50 years or longer, why are they the biggest? Part of it is just time. Part of it is just compound effect, right? They've been around a long time. People know their name. So these types of things can really give an agency that doesn't, let's say, have 50 years under their belt, it gives you that leverage, it gives you that advantage because you can do that. You can create that narrative where your name is out there all the time. And look, think about it this way. Fortune 500 companies are no dummies. Why do they sponsor all these things? Like why put their names on these things? Like you think about companies like Cisco. It's mostly a B2B tech company. I don't mean the food, I mean the CISCO. Um, and you'll see, you go to a soccer game or football game and you see their name on the stadium. Why? Right? But it's not their target audience or whatever. Maybe a fraction of it. But again, much bigger picture if you step back and you look at it, then you say, oh, because they get it. It's familiarity, it's brand trust. So agencies are not immune to this.
So you mentioned something there with the narrative or the story, and in many ways, the accolades are the manifestation or the validation of what the agency has put into achieving that. And so there are areas of expertise or things that the agency wants to be part of their brand, and so those awards just validate that. So that rolls back up into their brand. And I think we separate out marketers who maybe use those accolades as kind of fluff, but then there are those that go beyond the fluff, if you will, and actually leverage those accolades to help them specifically drive new revenue for their business. So you mentioned something with that narrative and that storyline, which I think it plays really well into.
Yeah, so, part of it is, again, recognizing that not every award is gonna lead to a slew of clients. It's so funny because as agencies, we do this, right? Like, we tell our clients this, like, "Listen, even if you rank for this or you get this thing, it's not it's not immediate. It's going to take time to build that narrative to over it there is such a strong compound interest, phenomena that's at play here. At the same time, I don't think that enough is done when companies have an award, they usually just are like, "Okay, I guess, I don't know, like, put it in a memo, put the logo on the website." But there's so much more that you can do, letting your current clients know. A lot of times, Tara, a big thing is retention, right? Like, not just how do you attract clients, but how do you retain clients? And part of retaining clients, part of client retention is making sure that they continuously feel like they're doing business with the best, much more likely to stay. And what I think is kind of fascinating is how again, I always look at Google searches because I think the trends are so telling, right? What you find is people do more searches after they buy something than even before they buy something because they want reassurance that they've made the right decision. Especially when we're so bombarded with so much input, it's like, how do I know what's what? What's going on here? Um, and so these are kind of key things to sort of keep in mind there. Being able to share that story with your current clients, sharing that on social media. And the other fear agencies, companies, every brand has this fear. oh my God, we're putting this out too much. Too much is not enough. in in our head, it feels like a lot. Like, oh my God, we've talked about this award 8 times. The person you're trying to reach hasn't seen it once. Maybe, guys, like, if someone says, "Wow, you guys are out there too much," that's a great problem. I will take that challenge problem any day over not being seen enough. So, accolades like this, yes, you need to really work them through, adding it to your email signature, making sure your employees know, LinkedIn posts, social posts, Instagram, right? Tell that story. Client newsletters. It really has to be company news where you beat that drum. Sales nurture sequences. This is a huge one. So many agencies, well, I won't say so many, but I'll say a lot of agencies that are growing steadily and especially are seeing great growth, do outbound marketing. If you're doing outbound marketing, using earned media, right, is a way better gives you a way better chance of getting in the door, getting an appointment, getting on a call than if you're just doing cold messages. Like, who are you? That's really what you're trying to accomplish here. The way you get from, honors to dollars is you take out the who are you part of the equation. You're trusted, right? You think about big names, Accenture, Deloitte, all these, the reason these names keep growing is because people know them. They trust them. Trust comes with time. It comes with the stories other people are telling you about you. It comes with third party credibility. So these are the things you're really trying to build here.
And folks can tell when a company is just trying to sell a product as opposed to being, the expert and helping them, actually grow their business. And so, folks many times turn to those agencies who are going to be there for the long haul and to actually help them strategically grow, not just offer a service or just offer a one-time product, but actually be there to help them, look at new ways of doing business and growing customers and retaining their clients.
Sure, yeah. I mean, look, I would say clients hands down want proactiveness, right? They want their agencies to come to them with ideas, with growth, with all sorts of things. They're really, really looking for that. And so I think the more you can be proactive, the more you can set forth those ideas, the more you can go ahead and be that thought leader, that change leader. Um, and the more you're quoted in the media, again, clout, increasing the clout of your brand, your agency will impact every area: retention, attraction, employee attraction. We haven't even talked about this a ton, but so many times we want to attract good talent. Where does good talent want to go work? They wanna go work for the best too. People are always like, "I wanna attract the best." Okay, well, then you've gotta be not just be the best, you have to be perceived as the best. I think this is often a disconnect too. Just because you do great work doesn't mean that others see that you do great work. Like, being able to tell the story about the things that you're doing is just as important as what you are doing, especially for, you know, especially for especially for moving the needle on things, especially for, um, really if you wanna grow your agency, if you wanna grow your brand in the next 5 years, this is crucial.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier too about, repetition where to us it feels like, oh, we're saying the same thing over and over. But I think for every time you say something, there's probably 4 to 5 or more ways to say that, so that the message really resonates with folks, who might perceive the brand a little bit differently, depending on the comfort level or the amount that they know about your business. So
Yeah, Tara, like, they who I think it was Forrester that did this research, and don't quote me on this, but I know the research is sound. They said before COVID, in 2019, it took like 17 touch points for someone to go from a prospect to a buyer. Today, it takes 21 touch points. 21. So this is why I said there's this fallacy of, oh my God, we're gonna be out there too much or we're gonna bombard our audience. No, 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 no. You are not gonna bombard your audience.
right, and with those 21 touch points, you think of it too with folks who might be doing more of the cold call, outbound, as opposed to being out there with a strong message and actually, information that is a value add to their prospective customers and to their current customers. It's a pretty big gap, and so you have to make sure to use those 21 touch points in a way that's meaningful for your customers.
Yeah, great, great point. And meaning is also again a very high bar, and I'm totally guilty of this myself because I'm like, if it's not super valuable, do we share it? And it's like, yeah, share it because there is value in just keeping your name out there. There's absolutely value because, I think there's nothing, at least for me as an agency owner, more gut wrenching than when someone's like, oh, I wish I'd found you first. Right. And you're like, noted, because it's to me that represents like we didn't do enough to get in front of you when you were making that decision that we weren't your first choice or we met later in the process, right? So to me, that's what I'm always looking to avoid. And I think what most and so again, what we feel is like, wow, that's so much. It's not too much. It's really not. And not every and it's funny because we're also, as you know, we're Sharp Spring users and Sharp Spring customers. And what I find really interesting about that is sometimes we'll do a newsletter and I'll tell the team, like, guys, that seems a little basic to me. And they're like, okay, but let's see, we'll test it out, right? Test, test, test. And so we'll test it. And that's the stuff that gets the best response. And I'm just like, okay, it was basic for me. It was not basic for our audience.
That's
So there's that fallacy too, where you're like, well, yeah, but your clients don't know what you know.
right. Good point. I think, as marketers, we're quick to get onto the next thing or the next big, bright and shiny thing that's in front of us and, staying true and being diligent to make sure that we're breaking down what we're doing already into very simple, digestible pieces, if you will.
Yeah. And
It's
I
really
want to I want to call this out because it's interesting. We have Armin joining us from Namibia, Windhoek, Namibia. And I have a really interesting story about Namibia. So I was in Namibia, I know, like 8 years ago. And I had a keynote there, and I've never been to that part of the country. I landed, there was a gentleman who picked me up who happened to this is how media works, and he's like, again, first time in the country, great people, by the way, lovely, like, wonderful example of humanity. I had a wonderful time. So I'm there, and this gentleman keeps looking at me in the mirror, and I'm like, "Hey," and he's like, "Were you just on the Inc. 30 under 30 list?" And I
like,
and I just cracked up because I was like, "Oh my god," like, what are the odds, right? And the truth is the odds are pretty high. Like, the reason those things matter is because people read them, they get amplified. So, again, it's very easy to look at these things and be like, "Oh, it was a pat on my back. Cool." But I think it's much more important to look at it and say, "Yeah, but what is the impact? And how many people are you reaching? And, what, um at the end of the day, what does that mean?"
and making those meaningful connections as well. That's great. Okay, so Shauna, let's shift a bit. What would you say? I'll do a couple questions here, rapid fire. Shifting a bit. What do you think has been the most surprising, and let's keep it recent, maybe change you've seen in the industry?
Um, Change I've seen in the industry. So more and more, I think customers wanting to sell themselves. Like they're not even, and this has been an ongoing thing where they're not looking to engage the company until they're ready, right?
Mm.
Um, and and that's why it's so important that you're out there because here's what everyone on this call on this webinar has to realize: your prospects are not raising their hand and being like, "Here I am. I'm here. I'm listening. Great blog post. Wow, high five on that newsletter." Majority of people are consuming content quietly and they're making decisions based on that. They're talking in Slack chats. They're conversing on WhatsApp. They're sending LinkedIn messages. All of this is happening behind the scenes. All right. There's like you don't get visibility into that. And I think that is a big shift because it I think pre-COVID, we were really kind of forcing be like, I want to see it. If I can't see it, it's not happening. And now you have to accept that just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. In fact, that's where it is happening. Reddit groups, Discord chats, WhatsApps, Slack. The majority of our so I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent here, but social media is sort of my initial passion. And I'm going to explain how I think the world is changing because it makes a difference. The way we communicate and the way we're buying and making decisions. So this applies to all your prospects. You have the inner circle, and this is where you have your communities. Some of the top apps I use right now on my phone: Slack, LinkedIn messages, WhatsApp, Marco Polo. for some of my, I keep in touch with for some of my girlfriends and family. These are my top 4 apps. Okay. Notice none of these apps on Telegram, which is where I have a lot of my professional networks. So 5 apps. None of these are public. This is where content is getting shared. I click links, people share information. So much is happening, but it's not public. Doesn't mean that I'm not being impacted by what I'm consuming. Now you have the outer layer. This is your Facebook groups. This is your Reddit groups. This is community. This is kind of mass, where, so this would be my LinkedIn. This would be my Twitter. If you're, into Clubhouse, whatever, that's kind of the broader, now the metaverse, right? So you've got kind of this broad out here community. This is where you can obviously give input. And so Accolades fits into this because people are sharing, they're looking at it. But then where a lot of those decisions are getting made, it's internal. It's in those cocoons. And you don't have access to that. And I think especially with now, the cookies, the no tracking, all of this we're going towards realizing, and I hope sooner than later, you cannot you cannot have, like, creepy visibility into what your prospects are doing. You just don't have that. And I don't know if we've ever had that, but I think we certainly, as marketers, feel better when we think we do because, and again, I could have a whole different conversation on this, but, a lot of times the way leadership judges marketing is completely, like, divorced from how marketing is actually impactful.
The real
We
world.
focus
Right.
on the measurable rather than the meaningful, Tara, to your point earlier, which is it
Exactly.
meaningful? But we focus on the measurable, right? Like how many views, how many comments, but that's not how people are engaging. Because I can tell you some of the choices I made in the last, like, again, always think about this. And like in the last 30 days, right? Decided to join a cruise, a Disney cruise, and you go with the family. But came through an internal message through one of my cousins sending a link, was like, "Hey, we should do this with the kids." Okay, cool. It wasn't so for Disney, right? Now I go search Disney cruise on Google. Disney's team goes, "Ah, someone came through search." No. That's that wasn't the starting point. Anyways, I share all this to say this is where accolades really matter because just because you can't see it and you can't take that red thread and say, okay, from here to here to here, doesn't mean it's not impactful.
Yeah, you mentioned something there that, I think we've talked about in a couple of these sessions, how where marketers have now fully shifted their strategies to be that which we can measure, right? So every touch point has to be measured when in reality that's not how people are buying. They're buying through those influences that are happening in those other channels that marketers can't measure. And so it requires a completely different strategy.
It does. And so what we're seeing is they're making decisions in the messy middle, right? So
Yeah.
it's yes, you might have a trigger, but then they're evaluating, they're exploring, and then they're buying. But the miasma around all of this is exposure. And by the way, this isn't something I created. This is something Google spent millions of dollars creating how B2B buyers buy. You can go search messy middle and you can see exactly how this functions. But I find this fascinating. And so what we're talking about today is the exposure. It's that constantly keeping your brand out there. So when there is a trigger, when they are exploring and evaluating, it's your brand they're seeing over and over again, which ultimately, and especially when you're selling to customers, I think this is something that is of note. If you are B2B, and most agencies you are, right? You're selling to other businesses. What you really have to realize is people like, so I think this is understanding this can be such a game changer. In a B2C interaction, the customer's trying to avoid regret. I don't want to buy that face cream because I don't know, I don't want to shell out whatever bucks and not like it, right? I don't want to regret it the next day. In a B2B transaction, unless you are working with the CEO, the owner, right? Like the the head honcho, what the buyer is trying to avoid is blame, right? Now,
That's right.
fairly, unfairly doesn't matter because at the end of the day, your boss is going to say, like, Tara, why'd you choose this company? Why are we going with them? And the easy answer, and I'm not saying this is the wrong answer, but the easy answer is often you're the best. Like if your boss said go get coffee, where are you gonna go get coffee from, Tara? Not saying your boss sends you to get coffee. I'm just saying if your boss said, "Hey Tara, can you go get me some coffee?" Where would you go?
Right. The brand that comes to mind would be Starbucks.
Yes, you'd go to Starbucks, right? You know it, but you also know it's safe. Your boss is gonna turn around and be like, "Tara, what's this? Why would you go to Starbucks to bring me
That's
coffee?" Right? Like, so it's the safe choice. Even if you don't drink Starbucks yourself, you go
that's
with a brand you know. If your boss is like, "Hey, go buy some pens," and you buy a box of Bic and you're like, "Here you go. Here's pens for the office." They're gonna be like, "What company is this?"
right.
It's Bic. They've been around for 100 years. Pretty solid choice. Cool.
That's right.
So these are the types of things that you really want for your agency. I want it for my agency. I want, everyone to know Zen Media and to have a certain I want to be top of mind. I want mind share because this is so crucial. Accolades, all of this is towards community. And wherever community goes, revenue grows. Right. So I think even with Revenue Rockstars, you guys are creating all this content, you're creating community, right?
That's right.
Um, and that community leads to revenue.
That's right. And I think, behind the buyers, whatever you want to call them, personas, target audience, there are people, right, that are making purchase decisions based on all kinds of different criteria, sometimes fear, sometimes going with the safe thing. And so, at the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure we're talking, with real people, helping them navigate the challenges that are ahead of them, in their business, helping them find new ways to reinvent themselves, looking at ways that they can be relevant, 5 years down the road as this industry changes so rapidly. So these are the discussions that we are looking to have. Not that we have solved everything, ourselves, but these are conversations that we want to participate in as well for our business.
Sure. And I think that's important is to realize like we're all kind of learning and growing, right? So this isn't which I really love about Revenue Rockstars. And I think all the guests you've had here are folks that are on the front lines. They're experimenting. I a lot of what I'm sharing with you, it's my agency experience. I'm telling you what's working, what's changed, all of these things. I'll give you an example. We have a client right now called Webinursha. They're a B2B branding and design agency. They do great work. They're in Silicon Valley. And they do great work and they have amazing clients, but they haven't done the best job telling their story. And so this is kind of where we've come in and they were on the Inc. 5000 list, which is a really big accomplishment. It means you're a fast growing company and you've seen progress. And so being able to use that to share the story. And then of course when Meta happened with Facebook, it's like, hey, can you like, is this a good rebrand? So positioning them as a resource, telling the founder story. I think it's so easy to dismiss that, but most agency owners that I know have fascinating founder stories, right? Where they come from, why they're doing what they are, what drives them. And so in this case, the founders are two family friends, roommates, kids, basically who grew up together, went to college and decided they wanted to do this. And so it's a fascinating story of how do you keep a friendship strong through those years as you grow a company. So again, part of this is finding those stories and using those stories to keep your company relevant. So at first glance, where you're like, oh, it's B2B, it's branding. How sexy is that to press? So many angles. And it really does come down to being able to tell that story and staying consistent and keeping your name out there. Because for them, even one client is major, right? It pays for all their marketing investment because they're working with these mega brands. But for these mega brands, they want to work with the best. They're not looking at budgets. They're concerned with how do we hire? How do we know? How do we go to our bosses? And by the way, I'm not saying Starbucks is the best coffee, right? But it's the perception.
That's right. That's right. I would agree with that. So Shama, we are late in the year and, all of us are in that, planning stage for the look ahead into next year.
Yeah.
Give us a few lessons you've learned from this last year that you would like to share and maybe something, what will you do differently going into next year? What did you learn that you're not going to do going into next year?
Yeah, Tara. So one of the things that I'm really focused on this year, going into New Year, is processes. So it's like, great, we have a new piece of content. How can we really, I don't want to say automated, but how can we make it much more systematic to where, like I just talked to the team this morning and I was like, look, we have great blog posts. They don't always get tweeted. How can we make it so every blog post gets a tweet, gets a LinkedIn? Same thing that I'm telling everyone right here. We're trying to practice and, what we preach. And it is constant. It's constantly trying to tweak that and making sure. But I think that's what's so important to me in the new year. It's not necessarily, some kind of radical new idea, but just making sure that we're getting the most out of what we're already doing. And I think that's something that I'm really focused on. And then also as a CEO and trying to figure out where's my time best spent, right? Because there's so many options today, and I think I don't have the answers on this, but I can tell you where I think the world is going. Video, podcast, TikTok, so many options. But I think at the end of the day, it does boil down to creating that splash and making sure that the overall brand narrative is strong, and it is much more of a qualitative feel that people get around the brand, and part of it is familiarity, keeping the brand out there so people know the name, they trust the name, um, and that recognition, that trust, that is essentially what turns, honors into dollars.
It's great. And thank you so much, Shama. The time flew by. Uh, this is great. The results should speak for themselves. And again, Shama, I just want to say thank you for your partnership and the rich takeaways that you gave to all of us today.
No, my pleasure, Lise. Yeah, you know what? We're all in this together. I think that's my takeaway from all of this is that we're all learning, we're all growing, and hopefully if something I shared was useful to the audience, then I hope it helps your businesses. Like at the end of the day, a rising tide raises all boats, and it's something I really live by.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you again, Shama. And thank you, everyone who's joined us today.
Bye, guys.